Hello everyone and welcome back to a brand new video and welcome to episode 58 of our F225 Hotlap and Setup series. Yes, today we return, finally, with the all-new 2025 F2 cars. Yes, of course, I started doing this series with the 2024 cars, and then pretty much immediately, EA announced that the F225 cars were finally going to be releasing, so I held off just in case the cars had changed inside the game. Now, luckily they haven't, so the two setups we've already done will still work inside the title. But yeah, today though we return here to the iconic Suzuka circuit, and a bit like Shanghai last time round, I actually think this place is more fun with the F2 cars. Suzuka, I think the big problem with why modern Formula 1 isn't that fun to drive around here is actually just the weight of the cars. So coming here with something a little bit lighter, a little bit less power, you know, something that's actually more similarly paced to, say, the old V8 cars of the early 2010s, I actually find this place a lot more fun to really try and get a lap hooked up. Of course, if you don't know what this series is about, I go in, I provide you with a race-ready setup inside the F125 game. I talk you around the tracks, what you want to be aiming for, where your braking markers should be, what gears you want to be using, everything like that. And then last but not least, I leave you with a hot lap. As always, timestamps will be linked down in the description below if you just want to head to a certain part of this video as well. A massive thank you to everybody for their continued support on this series. We're steadily closing in on 15,000 subscribers, so if you aren't already and you do find these videos useful, please do make sure you drop us a sub. Of course, as always, I provide all of these for free, so that's kind of like the best way you can help us out with these videos as well. But yeah, without further ado though, let's head out onto the Suzuka circuit. Well, making our way then down in towards the Casio Triangle, getting ready to start a lap then here from Suzuka. I would say if you're starting a hot lap, avoid the inside curb through that final corner and try to give yourself the longest run back around towards the start-finish line. Activate the DRS. You're going to be all the way up in 6th gear though as we make our way down in towards that first corner. Of course, just like Formula 1, the first part of the turn is actually just about flat out, but you actually want to turn in a little bit later. You want to aim to kind of get the car halfway down the track. Of course, with the Formula 1 cars, you can hug the apex quite nicely and still get the rotation through turn 2. In the Formula 2 cars, it's not as easy, so just as you go past the end of that first curb, that is when you want to get on the brakes. Bring the car all the way down to 2nd gear as you try and rotate in, and you want to go for a really late apex through turn 2 there. Get the car back up through 3rd and 4th gear, and then once you're up into 4th, you are not changing gear throughout the entirety of these S's. Really try to attack the curbs through the first part. You will need to nudge the brake a little bit. It is all about trying to rotate the car around through all of these corners there. This third part should be completely flat, and then again you probably will need a blend through this final right-hander of this section. Try not to run out too far wide, but again, Dunlop corner is completely flat out as you try and carry the speed up the hill. Of course, then you're going to be up through 5th gear then as we make our way towards the top of the circuit. And the end, of course, of Sector 1. Aiming for the 50-meter board, quick stab of the brake before you flick the car in. Be careful that you don't run too wide through the second part. And then just as you get the car straightened up, down 2 gears. Try to avoid taking too much apex curb, but unlike the F1 cars, you can actually take a lot of exit curb through the exit of the Degners there. Back up into 5th gear though as we make our way through the kink before we get into the hairpin. Just at the end of the curb, that is when you want to get on the brakes. All the way down to 2nd gear. Try to avoid using first, but you've got to be really careful of rear locking on the way in. Again, you'll notice when we go into the hot lap, I try and keep a little bit of throttle in the car. I've mentioned it before, but you almost have to incorporate the Ayrton Senna style of kind of blipping the throttle to try and obviously keep the turbo spinning. Otherwise, if you don't and you try and go full throttle on the exit, you're just going to be looking behind you where you've just come from. So, yeah, you can get on the throttle really early on the exit of the hairpin, but you've got to make sure you do it the right way. So, yeah, just be really careful with that, but then try and get on the loud pedal as early as possible. Cycle back up then through 3rd, 4th and 5th gear as you try and give yourself the line of least resistance down in towards Spoon. The car will get right towards the top of 5th, but don't bother changing up to 6th gear because it'll just make the line a bit more awkward. Braking just past the 50-meter board there. Try to go for a really late downshift so you can carry some speed through the first part. Maximise the width of the corner down to 3rd gear, and then just as you go past kind of the tightest bit of the curb, that is when you want to get on the loud pedal again. of course, the longest flat-out section of the lap, so you want to try and make sure you're on that throttle really, really early there. Use the curbing on the outside, and then again, you're going to be cycling back up through the gears as we make our way in towards 130R. Of course, in a modern Formula 1 car, 130R not really a corner. The same can be said for Formula 2. I would assume, in fact, that this is entirely flat out, even in the rain. Try to give yourself the shortest run, though, down in towards the Casio Triangle. Want to get on the brakes right at the 100-meter board. Again, be careful of rear locking as we make our way in. Down to second gear, attack the first curb really, really aggressively. The second curb as well. Don't take too much out of it, otherwise you could get done for track limits. And then as we try to give ourselves the shortest run back towards the start-finish line, then that is going to be a lap of the Suzuka circuit. Like I said, I think this place is fantastic fun. In the F2 cars inside this game. I actually prefer it to racing the Formula 1 cars around here. And yeah, getting a lap hooked up was really, really satisfying. Before I show you that though, let's head back to the pit lane and I'll talk you guys through the setup. Well, taking a look then at our global leaderboard, we are pretty much a second off the world record pace. There you can see we are 88th currently globally as well, as for some reason it still shows up that we're using the 2024 car. I'm definitely not. Leo Fornaroli was not in F2 last year. But yeah, taking a look then at the setup figures, of course, Suzuka is quite a weird circuit in the F1 games. There's a lot of adverse camber. There's a lot of kind of movement around the circuit, of course, where this place has been laser scanned. It is a little bit trickier to try and obviously get nailed, because obviously you have got a bit more nuance around the circuit. 30-23 though for the front and rear aero, of course. Like a lot of setups obviously on this game, you want to run more front wing than rear wing, but again in the F2 cars it seems like you can run a much bigger variation than you do sensibly in the F1 cars. It doesn't give you as much oversteer, but you have got to be a bit careful through that first sector. If you're really, really struggling with it, I would say up it to like 32-27, but ultimately, you know, especially in the F2 cars, it is really, really important that you carry a lot of speed down the straights, and top speed is completely dictated by, obviously, how much aero you're running, because these things will hit VMAX in 6th gear as well there, so you're always better off having a little bit of headroom on your top-end speed, and of course, to do that, you have to run slightly less wing. 100-100 on the on and off throttle diff. Again, I think that's going to be fairly standard around a lot of circuits inside this game. And then minus 3.4, minus 1.9, 0.01 and 0.11 for your camber and toe angles. Again, seems to just be the meta inside this game. 39-18 though, very, very firm front and rear suspension. And then I think for the first time ever inside this series, 16 front anti-roll bar, 12 rear. Normally, obviously, at the very least, you'd be running this the opposite way round, but very, very firm front anti-roll bar. Again, I think, obviously, you're allowing the rear anti-roll bar to be a little bit softer so the car can squat on corner exit, you know, through the exit of both Degners, through the hairpin, and then even, you know, a little bit more on the exit of turn 1 as well, and the final couple of corners. So, yeah, running that lower rear anti-roll bar just helps you get the traction. 1946, though, ride height. The F2 car here doesn't really get affected by curbs in the way the F1 car does. So, for example, the exit of the Degners, you'll know, obviously, we were able to attack the curb there without struggling with it too badly. So, yeah, you can run really low ride height. It will make the car a bit more sensitive over the curb still, but yeah, you can run a lot more aggressive than you do in the F1 cars. 54-100 for your brake bars and pressure. Again, just what I like to run inside this game. I would say for a race stint, you might want to run this at like 55-98, just in case you're struggling with locking up down in towards the hairpin and a couple of other places. But ultimately, I found it comfortable on 54-100. It's just if you really struggle with the brake, I would run perhaps a more, a less aggressive preset. And then last but not least, 26.5 PSI across all 4 tyres around this circuit. Of course, Suzuka being a figure of 8 track, it does tend to use up all of the tyres fairly evenly, at least obviously left to right hand side. So yeah, that's just what we're running here. Again, kind of gives you an extra bit of rotation through the S's, things like that. But again, the F2 cars, the tyre wear can be quite bad as well on certain locations. And, well, I think Suzuka might be one of those. So, yeah, maxed out rear PSI just to try and give yourself a bit of a helping hand. And also, hopefully, try and manage the tyre temperature just a little bit more as well then. That's going to do us, though, for this video. A massive thank you to everybody that has made it this far. Of course, as always, I'm going to leave you guys with a hot lap here of the circuit. Like I said in the intro, though, please do make sure you leave a like, get yourself subscribed, and we'll be back very soon when Formula 2 heads to Bahrain, an actual Formula 2 track again.